Well, hello, America. I told you earlier this week about George Soros and the funding that he sent to the Center for American Progress. Not really a place known for its, cost-cutting measures, but it did a little booklet on education. And it said these are the things, these are the niche items that we can cut from education. Are you ready? U.S. history, constitutional studies, and anything to do with economics. That's what the Center for American Progress, they say that is niche, the Constitution. Well, the reason why I wanted to tell you about that is because that niche history is being erased, and it's only going to get much, much worse. The way history has been disappearing, you have to ask yourself why. Why haven't you been taught some of the things that you've learned on this program? Because history serves as a damning series of rock-solid evidence that progressive policies do not work. The only way to convince people to keep trying them is to keep changing the names, places, dates, erase whole sections of history. You've got to change history. Progressives are an enemy to the Constitution. They want to progress past the Constitution. Woodrow Wilson and FDR are propped up as great American presidents. If you read anything about Woodrow Wilson, you will not believe that this guy isn't known as one of the worst presidents of all time. Racist, awful, awful man. I don't even have to start with his policies. Oh, but I could. But this guy is remembered as neutral at best. We're told about all the wonderful things FDR did. You know, he got us out of the New Deal, out of the Great Depression. No, wait a minute. Can we ask this question? Why is the Depression called the Depression every other country except for America? In America, it's called the Great Depression because of the policies of FDR. Now, have you ever heard of Calvin Coolidge? If so, what do you know about him? You read anything in your history books and they'll say, oh, well, he ran a laissez-faire style government. Oh, let's just pause for a moment and savor the thought of laissez-faire government. I don't even know what that means. Calvin Coolidge, the president progressives need you to forget about. He was actually Ronald Reagan's favorite president, or one of them. He drastically reduced the size of government and thwarted a depression. A depression in 1920? Did you even know that? Bigger, deeper than 1929. What did he do to get out of that depression, out of that decline? Country was in horrible shape when he came into office, and then when he left, it was the Roaring '20s. Another little fact progressives don't want you to notice. Tonight we'll take a close look at America's, well, one of the best presidents I think we've ever had that you don't know very much about. David Petrucia is here. He is a historian and author of Silent Cow's Almanac. He also, you wrote 1920. Year of the Sixth President. Which is an unbelievable book you should read. Amity Shlaes is also here. Amity, she wrote the book The Forgotten Man before I knew anything about progressivism. As I was seeing the economy starting to spiral out of control, I picked up this little book called The Forgotten Man. Amity is responsible for much of the nightmare that people call me now, because I learned so much from that book and got me kind of into this Alice in Wonderland rabbit hole that is now called the Glenn Beck Program. She is a senior fellow at the Council of Foreign Relations, which I believe is evil. And she is a contributing writer to a new book, Why Coolidge Matters. And you're also writing a new one on Coolidge, just called Coolidge, right?
Yes.
Why the heck would anyone care about Calvin Coolidge?
Because every politician who wants to obtain office says, I'm going to do 4 or 5 things. I'm going to cut taxes. I'm going to reduce the waste in government. I'm going to cut the debt. And I'm going to bring you prosperity. And everyone's going to have a job, and there's going to be no inflation, and they never do it. We fall for it every stinking time, and they never do it. And Calvin Coolidge did all of those things. And then the historians and the pundits say, He was in office for 6 years and he didn't do a damn thing.
Right. That's kind of his highlight, isn't it? That he didn't. I mean, he did an awful lot, but it was in the reducing government. It wasn't going to save anybody.
Well, that's right, Glenn. I call Coolidge the great refrainer because he was the opposite of a modern president. When he saw trouble, he refrained and stood back and said, therefore, things may get better if someone stays out of the way. What are examples? A big one was the flood of the Mississippi in 1927, which was their Katrina. Did Coolidge race down there? No, he did not. He sent his Commerce Secretary, Hoover, but he didn't jump in. He said, well, maybe the federal government's role isn't to jump in. Maybe it's the job of the states to manage a regional crisis. There was federal funding that he signed for this crisis, this terrible flood, but he made the lawmakers reduce the funding to a third of its size. He said, don't magnify this emergency and give a new role to the federal government. Make it smaller and handle it.
Okay, now wait a minute. So people understand this emergency. What year did this happen?
1927.
1927. So people understand this emergency. A large area was under 30 feet of water. How big was, do you have this?
Hundreds and hundreds of miles.
Okay. And under 30 feet of water, hundreds of people died. This is the Katrina of the 1920s. Of that generation, this was the Katrina. And to show you the difference and how far we've come with progressives, at the time that this happened, nobody was standing on their roof with signs saying, help me. They were helping themselves. And what he did actually was even a big step forward. People were not, the federal government at the time did not go in and solve these problems. Yes or no?
He refrained from that. He refrained from pouring federal money into it. Hoover coordinated, as he did in many cases in the World War I, food shortages through voluntarism. Now, Coolidge also opposes federal aid to highways and such, and this kind of taking money from one state, Texas, and giving it to New York or whatever. You know, this is what he said. To tempt the states by federal subsidies is to sacrifice their vested rights. It is not a wholesome practice, no matter how worthy the object to be obtained. It's just something which rewards the profligate, encourages waste. When you get money for free, you don't work it like as if you worked it to earn it.
Nothing of value. You don't appreciate the value of something.
And he understood that because of his background in Vermont. He comes from a very tiny little place, Plymouth Notch in Vermont, and he goes around with his father, who's a tax collector. And he says, when I went around with my father, I realized that people had to work to earn money to pay those taxes. A very simple lesson, but which a lot of people in Washington don't know today.
Okay. So now let me take you here so you understand the setting. Woodrow Wilson, who, if you've watched 2 minutes of this show, you know I hate that guy. Woodrow Wilson has taken this country, and while he's in office, he has given us federal income tax. He has given us prohibition. Woodrow Wilson gave us the Fed. He totally transformed things. He's introducing now social justice. He's tried to introduce the League of Nations, which is basically the United Nations, and Americans like that League of Nations as much as we now like the League of Nations. It was through trickery and progressive tactics that got the United Nations through. They learn. That's what progressives, one thing they do is they learn which devices work and which don't. So he was wildly unpopular. His second term, he runs against the war, and he says, I'll keep you out of war. In January, he is sworn in, and I think it's the next month.
March. He's sworn in March back then, yes.
Okay.
And in April, we're at war.
Yeah, okay. A month later, I'll keep you out of war. A month later, we're at war. Then you have the plague, the epidemic, the flu epidemic that wipes people out. Guys start to come home, and the economy, all of this stuff has happened. I mean, America has been traumatized. And Woodrow Wilson is at the time now incapacitated. He's had a stroke, and his wife is actually holding the... Nobody in Congress has even seen him for about a year. His wife is signing all of the documents for... It's